Hey guys, tonight we're not sipping wine under the stars or trading witty remarks with Socrates. Tonight we're hauling ourselves out of a flea-infested clay bed in a crumbling Athenian shack where the roof leaks, the neighbors argue like it's an Olympic sport, and breakfast is a stale fig if you're lucky. Ancient Greece, land of gods, glory and goat dung in the streets. Forget what your textbooks told you. This wasn't some toga, clad paradise where philosophers lounged around thinking deep thoughts while harp music floated through the air. This was daily survival in a world where plumbing was a myth, bathing was optional, and the only thing more unpredictable than the politics was your lunch. We're diving into the real side of ancient Greek life, the one that didn't make it onto the pottery, the one where you work until your back gives out, worship gods who throw lightning when they're cranky, and your only hope of a long life is not getting stabbed in a naval skirmish or crushed by a falling marble statue. So pour yourself a glass of wine if you must. Just don't expect it to make this experience feel any less painful. Welcome to ancient Greece. Let's begin. So now that you've mentally checked into ancient Greece, let's yank the covers off your glamorous philosophical fantasy and meet your real morning reality. You wake up on a floor, not a warm, polished hardwood floor, a dirt floor. Dry if you're lucky, muddy if it rained, and always just soft enough for bugs to feel comfortable starting a colony under your spine. Your mattress, a flattened pile of straw and regrets. That's been stepped on more than it's been slept on. There's no alarm clock, just the screech of a chicken, the bark of an overworked donkey, and the sound of your neighbor loudly arguing about olives before sunrise. Because nothing says good morning like hearing two men debate over whose crop is less disappointing at full volume. There's no soft light peeking through linen curtains, just the aggressive assault of sunlight barging through a hole in your roof, straight into your eyeballs. You squint, groan, and try to stretch, but your body is already halfway to being fossilized. Your joints crack like ancient pottery, and you consider briefly if you died in your sleep, and this is some kind of ironic afterlife. And the smell? Oh, the smell. Your house is a one-room wonder that doubles as a bedroom, kitchen, laundry area, and occasionally a home for your goat. It reeks of sweat, sour wine, stale bread, and the faint hint of something that probably died under the table last week. There's no Febreze. You are the Febreze. You either get used to it or pass out trying. You sit up. Your toga, if it even counts as a toga, is crumpled in a pile crusted with yesterday's dust and something sticky you don't remember encountering. There's no fresh pair waiting, just the same cloth you've been wearing all week and pretending doesn't smell like a festival latrine. You throw it over your shoulder and try to muster the energy to stand. But standing means responsibilities, and responsibilities mean dealing with other humans. And other humans in ancient Greece are loud, sweaty, and somehow always carrying fish. The floor is already warm from the sun. The flies are beginning their morning harassment shift, and your stomach is growling loud enough to scare your cat. But there's no coffee, no cereal, just a hopeful look toward a half loaf of bread that's harder than Plato's philosophy, and a jug of wine that's more vinegar than joy. You sigh. This is life, not a chiseled statue or a poetic sonnet, just dirt, heat, and the bitter realization that no, you're not a scholar or a hero or a demi-god. You're just a regular Greek trying to make it through a Tuesday without starving, stepping in goat poo, or getting roped into a civic debate at the agora. And this was just waking up. We haven't even talked about breakfast yet. Spoiler alert, it's worse. Let's go. After dragging yourself off the dirt floor, still wrapped in the aroma of sweat and disappointment, it's time for the most underwhelming part of your day. Breakfast. You shuffle over to the table, or what passes for one, Really, just a wooden plank balanced on two old crates. And stare at your options. Spoiler, they're bleak. There's a loaf of bread that could double as a weapon. Hard, cracked, and vaguely resentful of your existence. You tap it against the table, and it makes a sound like someone dropped a rock into an empty amphora. That'll go well with the single olive left floating in oil, like it's holding on to the edge of a lifeboat in a sea of despair. This is the breakfast of the not-so-champions. No eggs, no honey, drizzled pastries, no fresh fruit cascading out of a hand, woven basket while birds sing in the background. Just ancient gluten and salty sadness. You tear off a piece of the bread, which takes roughly the same effort as breaking a curse. Your teeth protest. Your jaw locks up. You're not chewing so much as surviving the experience. The olive, when you finally get to it, offers the only burst of flavour. And by flavour, we mean a punch of brine and bitterness that reminds you of every bad decision you've ever made. Congratulations, you've eaten. Now, let's talk wine. Because yes, it's morning, and yes, people are already drinking, but don't imagine some elegant sips from a goblet on a marble terrace. This wine is rough. It's thick, gritty, and tastes like it's been filtered through someone's regrets. And they mix it with water because drinking it straight would actually cause hallucinations. Not the fun kind. The why is the goat speaking Latin kind. You choke down a few sips, not because you want to, but because it's safer than the water alone, which might have something swimming in it, or dead in it. There's no cutlery, no napkins. You wipe your hands on your toga like a civilized beast, and toss the bread crust to the floor, where a chicken will probably fight the goat for it. You think about seconds, but laugh internally. Seconds imply there was a first worth repeating. Instead, you stare into the distance, stomach semi, full and soul mostly empty, and try to muster the strength the rest of the day. Your neighbour shouts something through the wall. You ignore it. Someone outside is already arguing about taxes. A dog pees on your doorstep. And you're just standing there with crumbs in your beard and wine in your bloodstream, wondering how in the name of Zeus you're supposed to achieve greatness on a breakfast that barely qualifies as food. But greatness won't wait, or at least the market won't. So you sigh, wipe your hands again, and prepare to face the day, powered by fermented grapes and existential dread. Next stop, the world of philosophy, which in ancient Greece usually meant yelling in a courtyard. Let's dive in. Fueled by stale bread and the lingering acidity of your breakfast wine, you step out into the warm chaos that is ancient Athens. The air hits you like a wall of dust, sweat, and street drama. You don't get far before you stumble upon one of the city's most iconic features, philosophy, or, as it's more accurately known in its natural habitat, men yelling in togas loudly in circles about everything. Forget the image of wise old sages peacefully sipping wine while pondering life's great mysteries. Real-life philosophy here is closer to a verbal boxing match held in a public square, where grown men argue over questions like, what is virtue, with the same intensity as a bar brawl over who stole whose sandals. One guy's waving his arms, spit flying, trying to explain why justice is a form of the soul's harmony. The other is just shouting back that he slept with his theory last night, and it didn't make any sense. You try to squeeze past them, but there's no escape. These men don't just talk, they perform, they pace, they gesture. They ask rhetorical questions and then answer them before you can blink. It's less Socratic method, more philosophical ambush. You make eye contact once, just once, and suddenly you're being asked to define the good, while 20 other citizens stop to weigh in like it's some kind of intellectual gladiator match. You mumble something about bread and run. What's worse, everyone thinks they're a philosopher. Everyone, the baker, the blacksmith. the guy with 3 teeth selling questionable fish by the docks. They all have theories, none of them agree, and all of them want to tell you why you're wrong. This isn't enlightenment. This is chaos wrapped in rhetoric, sprinkled with sweat and broken syllogisms. And of course, there's always one guy quoting Plato like he invented sunlight. He's barefoot, vaguely smug, and somehow doesn't blink. He follows you down the street, explaining how shadows on a cave wall are the true nature of reality, while you pretend to understand and silently pray for divine intervention or a nearby well to jump into. Eventually you escape, duck into an alley, catch your breath. You survived. The public yelling, but barely. Your ears are ringing, your brain hurts, and you're not any closer to understanding the universe, except that it definitely hates you. You wipe sweat off your forehead with a sleeve that smells like goat and self-loathing. This is philosophy in ancient Greece, not a quiet pursuit of truth, not elegant scrolls and candlelight, just loud men, dirt roads, and the eternal sound of someone shouting, "But what is truth?" while adjusting a toga that refuses to stay on. And that's just the morning. Next, we explore what happens when you try to clean yourself in a city where soap is a myth and public baths are an awkward group activity. Let's talk about hygiene, or as it should be called, organized rinsing with judgment. After barely escaping the philosophical shouting match and mentally questioning the fabric of reality, you decide to do something radical. Clean yourself. Not because you're suddenly enlightened, but because your toga has started fusing with your skin and small children are pointing at you like you're a cursed statue. So it's off to the local bathhouse, where ancient hygiene goes to die a slow, awkward death. Let's get one thing straight. Bathing in ancient Greece isn't a private affair. There's no candlelight, no eucalyptus, scented soaps, no relaxing music. What you get is a big public room filled with lukewarm water, naked men, and enough body hair to knit a ceremonial rug. Privacy is not part of the package, neither is modesty. You walk in, and it's just full exposure and questionable eye contact from the start. You try not to look directly at anyone, but it's like navigating a minefield of limbs, conversations, and sudden splashes. There's soap, kind of. Technically, you're using olive oil. Yes, oil, you slather yourself in it like you're preparing to be roasted. Then, in the most uncomfortable spa treatment known to man, someone scrapes it off with a curved metal tool called a strigil. Sounds fancy. It's not. It's cold, it's sharp, and it feels like someone is trying to peel off your shame with a spoon. You try to smile politely through the discomfort, but inside your soul is screaming. And the floors don't look at the floors. You thought the streets were bad. Try a slippery mosaic of other people's regrets. Hair, grime, flakes of dead skin that float by like tiny boats of filth. You tiptoe through it like you're on a sacred mission to avoid disease, but your toes still pick up something that feels both organic and illegal. There are no towels. You drip dry or flap your arms like an anxious bird until you're mostly just damp and emotionally empty. Your toga is now somehow wetter than before, and it clings to you like it's judging your life choices. You tie it anyway because dignity left the building about 6 naked men ago. You try to shake it off, quite literally, but the wet fabric just hugs you tighter, like an ancient curse passed down by generations of sweaty philosophers. And let's not forget the smell. You'd think bathing would fix that. It doesn't. The room is a humid stew of body odor, herbs, oil, and the general aroma of warm disappointment. You walk out feeling not clean, but mildly rearranged. Your skin shines, but your spirit has wilted. So yes, that was your bath, if you could call it that. Less cleansing, more socially sanctioned discomfort with a side of olive oil. You're slightly less dirty, slightly more traumatized, And now it's time to address another issue. The one that no amount of scraping can fix. It's time to use the toilet or whatever the ancient Greeks were pretending counted as one. Let's dive into the most tragic part of daily life. Brace yourself. You've bathed. If we're still pretending that counts as bathing, and now your body, as if in retaliation for everything it's endured today, decides it's time to relieve itself. Welcome to the Greek toilet experience, also known as rock bottom, for your dignity. You shuffle toward the latrine, stomach mildly clenched from that suspicious olive and the questionable wine-water combo. You're hoping for privacy, a quiet moment, maybe even a breeze. What you get is a row of stone slabs with holes in them, and a line of people who look far too comfortable making eye contact while squatting. There's no stall, no door, not even a bush to hide behind. It's communal, a one-room festival of bodily functions where men sit shoulder to shoulder, knees awkwardly touching, and discuss the weather while pooping. You try not to breathe, you try not to listen, but someone next to you is giving a full lecture on naval warfare while grunting through a bowel movement. This is your life now. You find a hole that looks relatively dry and hover above it, questioning every choice that led you here. The slab is cold, colder than your soul. You try to balance, but the angle is unnatural and your legs are trembling like you've just fought a minotaur. And then it hits you. There's no toilet paper. Of course there isn't. That's centuries away from being invented. What you have instead is a sponge on a stick, sitting in a bucket. A communal sponge, which means it has already been places, seen things, suffered trauma. You stare at it, hoping it will disappear. It doesn't. A guy next to you casually grabs it, wipes and drops it back, like it's just another Tuesday. You die a little inside. Eventually, after enough soul bargaining, you use it quickly, regretfully, with the kind of emotional detachment usually reserved for battlefield trauma. You wipe, you wince, you drop it back into the bucket of shared sorrow and swear you will never look anyone here in the eye again. And the smell, dear gods, it's like 1,000 dying goats and fermented onions had a picnic in a tomb. The latrine has no ventilation. The stench clings to your clothes, your skin, your very spirit. You stumble out like a broken man, gasping for air, dignity in shreds, heart full of silent screams. You try to rejoin society, but it's hard to look heroic when your toga is stuck to your thigh and you smell like ancient doom. This is the reality. No golden toilet seats, no perfumed hand towels, just a bucket of communal sadness and the haunting memory of what you just did. You want to forget. You won't. And yet, somehow, the day continues. You still have obligations, responsibilities, and unfortunately, that includes working out. At the gymnasium where the clothes come off again, and the awkwardness only increases. Yes, it gets worse. Let's go. You survived the latrine barely. You've been spiritually scarred by a communal sponge. Your nostrils are still twitching from the memory, and your toga hasn't dried properly. But guess what? No rest for the ancient. It's time for exercise. And in ancient Greece, that means the gymnasium, a place that somehow combines fitness, philosophy, and a deeply unsettling amount of full-body nudity. You walk in and immediately regret it. The first thing you notice after the wave of heat and body odor is that no one is wearing anything. Nothing, not even a strategic leaf. The Greeks believed in training the body in its most natural form, and by natural they mean aggressively naked. Men are stretching, wrestling, and running laps, and every square inch of them is on full, unapologetic display. There are limbs flying, there's slapping, and there is zero shame. You try to blend in, you try not to look, But the room is full of sweaty, glistening torsos and thighs that have seen far more sun than they should. And then there's the eye contact. Someone across the courtyard locks eyes with you, mid-lunge. And for a moment you question your entire existence. You quickly look away and pretend to be deeply interested in a nearby wall. But it's too late. The bond has been formed. You strip, hesitantly, peeling your damp toga off your body like a second skin of regret. There's no place to hide. You join a group stretching near the sand pit, where two grown men are currently wrestling, like their eternal souls depend on it. They're grunting, grappling, limbs intertwined, and it's not clear if this is sport or foreplay. Either way, everyone's watching with the same interest most people reserve for theatre. Someone bets a fig on who's going to win. Someone else just keeps clapping, and the workout, it's brutal. Push, up, sprinting, discus throwing, more wrestling. You're panting, sunburned, and starting to wonder if your left nipple just detached from friction. There's no water bottle, no breaks, no friendly trainer shouting encouragement. Just an old man with a stick yelling about discipline while smearing oil on his chest like a human breadstick. When you're done, you don't feel stronger. You feel broken, shaky-legged, sore in places you didn't know could ache, and covered in a thick layer of sand, sweat, and existential crisis. You try to rinse off in a shallow basin that 24 men have already bathed in today. It doesn't help. The oil just clings harder. You towel off with something that feels like woven tree bark and pray for a merciful God. Spoiler, there isn't one. You get dressed, or as dressed as a single sheet toga allows, and limp out of the gymnasium, questioning whether fitness is truly a virtue or just a form of sanctioned public torture. But there's no time to wallow, word. Has it a town assembly is gathering, which means it's time to pretend you care about politics again. Let's talk about democracy, Greek style, spoiler. It's mostly yelling. You limp away from the gymnasium, joints aching and dignity sand-blasted off your soul, hoping for a moment of peace. But no, that would be too merciful. Instead, you're swept straight into the great Athenian experiment that everyone loves to romanticize. Democracy. Sounds noble, right? Power to the people, civic engagement, enlightened debate. Wrong. What you actually walk into is a dusty amphitheater packed with sweaty men yelling at each other until someone either gives up or loses their voice entirely. You find a spot among the crowd, sitting on a rock that's somehow both hot and jagged, and try to look invested. A man in a faded tunic is already shouting about grain prices. Another counters with something about naval defense. A third guy just keeps shouting tyranny every 5 minutes, whether it's relevant or not. You begin to suspect no one really knows what's going on. Democracy, it turns out, is less a thoughtful process and more a live action shouting contest where logic goes to die. Everyone's involved, everyone has an opinion, and nobody has deodorant. The smell of civic duty is sour and overwhelming. You try to focus. But it's hard when the man next to you is picking olives out of his sandals and muttering about taxes like he's plotting a small rebellion. Occasionally, someone stands up and delivers what sounds like a well-thought-out argument. But it is immediately drowned out by a man waving his arms and accusing him of being a Persian spy. The crowd loves it. They cheer. They boo. It's politics, but with fewer laws and more chest hair. And bribery? Oh, it's happening. You just don't see it right away. But look closer. The wealthier citizens slip coins under tunics, whisper promises. And suddenly, people who were furious about boat funding are now singing its praises. Someone offers free wine after the vote. Someone else promises a better latrine system. It's not idealism. It's ancient lobbying with more yelling and fewer suits. You're required to vote, by the way. It's not optional. If you skip the assembly too many times, a guy shows up and marks your toga with red paint, like some kind of ancient truancy officer. Nothing says freedom like being publicly shamed for not wanting to listen to 30 men argue about whether goats should be allowed in the agora. Eventually, a decision is made. No one's sure how. There wasn't a clear vote. Just a lot of noise followed by an old man declaring, "It's settled." You clap, mostly because you don't want to look like a tyrant sympathizer. Then the crowd disperses, some smug, some confused, and most of them already preparing their next rant for tomorrow. This is democracy, not scrolls and noble speeches, just chaos, coin trading, and a whole lot of noise. You walk away dazed, with ringing ears and a mild headache, thinking maybe a philosopher had a point when he said democracy was mob rule with better sandals. But your day's not over yet, not by a long shot. You've got chores to do, and a front row view of slavery you pretend not to notice. Let's talk about that hypocrisy next. You leave the assembly with a brain full of shouted nonsense, a sweat-soaked toga, and the sinking realization that nothing decided today will actually improve your life. But as you walk past the marble homes of the upper class, their columns too clean, their courtyards too smug, you remember who democracy really works for: your rich neighbor. The guy with 2 names, 3 slaves, and 0 sense of irony, while you're over here scraping together olives and arguing about public toilets. He's lounging in the shade while someone else fans his grapes and scrubs his sandals. Slavery in ancient Greece isn't some shadowy underground system. It's casual, open, normal. Every upper-class home has slaves, plural, and they're not shy about showing it off. You pass by one courtyard and watch as a slave carries a grown man's dog across the marble tiles like it's a sacred relic. Another one is hand, washing a tunic while being yelled at for not using enough moonlight. It's not just labor, it's humiliation with a job description. Meanwhile, you, the proud free citizen, are out here doing everything yourself. You wake up in your dirt bed, cook your rock bread breakfast, clean your own goat droppings, and then trudge to the assembly so you can help pass laws that mostly benefit the guy with the slave-powered olive press. But hey, at least you're free. Free to starve, free to sweat, free to break your back hauling stones for 3 obols and a promise. You briefly consider what life would be like with a slave. Not in a tyrant way, just in a maybe, I wouldn't die at 40 from exhaustion kind of way. Someone to carry your water, someone to listen to your opinions without starting a debate about Aristotle. But then you remember you can barely afford your own food, let alone another human being, so you carry your own water and your own existential dread. The real kicker? Slaves can't vote, but they live better than you in some households. They get fed. They stay indoors. They don't have to wrestle naked in public or attend another political scream. Fest, and some of them, especially the educated ones, actually run the finances and raise the children of their masters, while said masters get drunk in the symposium and misquote Plato, and no one questions it. It's just how things are. Even the philosophers, those great moral thinkers, barely raise an eyebrow. Some even argue that slavery is natural. Natural, they say, as if owning a person is the same as owning a stubborn mule or a badly tuned lyre. You know it's wrong. Deep down, everybody probably does. But the system is old, profitable, and makes rich people feel important, so it stays. You spit into the dust and keep walking. At least you've still got your freedom raw, exhausting, unpaid freedom. But don't worry, there's a theatre performance tonight. Surely a nice evening of culture will make everything better. Except it won't. Because Greek theatre isn't about fun. It's about 3 hard tragedies and men yelling in masks. Let's go suffer artistically. After trudging past your rich neighbor's marble joy palace and reminding yourself that you'll never own a personal grape peeler, you head toward the one thing left on today's civic checklist, the theatre. Yes, Greek theatre, that sacred pillar of culture, drama, and moral reflection. But let's be clear right now, this isn't your average relaxing night out. This is a full-day, wine-fueled, emotional marathon in the sun, and the tickets might be free, but your sanity won't be. You arrive early because seating is chaos. It's a stone amphitheatre carved into a hillside, and if you don't grab a decent slab, you're stuck with a sunburned seat wedged between two men debating whether Dionysus prefers red or white. You sit, you shift, the stone is hotter than Hades' toenails, and within 10 minutes your lower back has already filed for divorce. But the show hasn't even started. No, first comes the parade of sponsors. Rich citizens who donated enough drachmae to fund the production strut around like sweaty peacocks, while everyone cheers and pretends to admire their civic generosity. Spoiler: they mostly just like hearing their names announced loudly in front of the poor. Then, finally, the play begins. And by play, we mean 3 solid hours of masked men yelling metaphors at the sky, while a chorus of 30 dudes chants in synchronized grief behind them. There's no subtlety, no quiet build-up, just instant despair. The main character always has a fatal flaw hubris. Mostly, and by the end of Act 1, someone's already blind, cursed, or dead. And you've still got 2 acts to go. You want to leave, but you can't. It's a civic duty. This is art, remember. It's meant to elevate the soul, or at least drown it in enough noise and suffering to forget about your unpaid taxes. You shift again, trying to find a new arrangement of bones that won't go numb. It doesn't work. A man next to you starts weeping. You can't tell if it's the play or just a reaction to the chorus shrieking in falsetto about fate. And let's not forget the wine. Oh yes, this entire event is essentially sponsored by Dionysus himself, so people are drinking heavily before, during, and after the performance. Jugs are passed down the rows. You take a sip. It tastes like burnt grapes and questionable decisions, but it dulls the pain in your thighs and makes the chorus slightly more tolerable. You start to understand why half the audience is swaying. Eventually, it ends, or you think it ends. The curtain doesn't fall, they don't have curtains, so the actor just dramatically dies on stage, and everyone stands up clapping like they just survived childbirth. You shuffle out, emotionally drained, spiritually confused, and deeply concerned about how much of that tragedy was based on real events. Congratulations, you've participated in culture. You're now officially well-rounded, but don't relax just yet. The market awaits. It's loud, it's smelly, and someone's about to charge you triple for a fish that might already be dead. Let's go shopping ancient Greek style. You shuffle out of the amphitheatre, emotionally dehydrated from 3 hours of theatrical weeping and loud metaphors about destiny. And you think, briefly, foolishly, that maybe now you'll get a quiet moment. You won't, because no Greek day is complete without a trip to the agora. The market, the social, political, and olfactory war zone, where dreams go to die and your purse goes to starve. You head in, already bracing for chaos, and the moment you step foot on that dusty square, your senses are assaulted like they just insulted someone's mother. The smell hits first, a noxious cocktail of fish, sweat, wine, unwashed armpits, old goat cheese, and something vaguely sweet but definitely rotting. Your eyes water, your soul winces. But there's no time to mourn your nose because someone's already yelling at you about figs. The vendors here don't invite you, they attack. You walk past a stall, and suddenly there's a man waving a squid in your face shouting, "Fresh catch. This one was still swimming yesterday." which is a bold claim considering its eyes are cloudy and it smells like betrayal. You try to find some bread that doesn't feel like a bludgeoning weapon and olives that weren't picked during the Bronze Age, but the prices are ridiculous. You pick up a cheese wheel and the vendor tells you it was blessed by Artemis herself, which apparently justifies it costing more than your sandals. You haggle. He scoffs. You threaten to walk away. He pretends not to care. You both know it's a performance. Eventually, you buy it anyway because you're hungry and tired and too emotionally scarred from the earlier play to argue over dairy. Then there's the fish, glorious centerpiece of Greek cuisine, and every stall claims theirs is the freshest, the juiciest, the least likely to kill you by midnight. One vendor says his fish were still jumping this morning. Another insists his come from a secret cove blessed by Poseidon himself. You believe none of them. All of the fish smell like existential dread. You pick the least offensive one, and the vendor smiles like he just won a war. You know you've been overcharged. He knows you know. No one cares. That's the agora for you. And don't even try to walk in a straight line. It's a maze of stalls, animals, and people who treat personal space as a foreign concept. You dodge a donkey, sidestep a child selling mystery herbs, and get bumped by a man shouting something about political injustice while juggling pomegranates. You wonder if this counts as cardio. Your thighs say yes by. The time you're done, your coin pouch is emptier, your hands are sticky, and your patience is dead. But hey, you've got dinner. Maybe, assuming the fish doesn't revolt overnight, you head home, arms full of overpriced produce, ready for some peace. But don't get too comfortable. Tomorrow's your cousin's wedding, and nothing says ancient Greek joy like child brides, forced smiles, and enough wine to forget your future. Sleep tight. You stagger home from the agora, arms full of semi-edible regrets, and your nose still processing the trauma of fermented seafood. You barely sit down before someone reminds you your cousin's wedding is tomorrow joy. Nothing gets the ancient Greek blood pumping like a good old-fashioned marriage ceremony, especially when it involves a bride who still plays with dolls and a groom who already has back pain and political opinions. Weddings here aren't about love. They're about property, alliances, and ensuring your future children inherit your mediocre fishing spot. The bride, in this case, is 12. Yes, 12. She's barely taller than her mother's amphora and has likely spent more time learning how to weave than how to speak in full sentences around men. The groom is 40. His toga smells like wine and disappointment, and he already has 2 grey hairs in his beard and an ex-wife who ran off with a potter from Corinth. But hey, he owns land. That's what counts. You show up for the festivities pretending it's normal, because it is. Everyone celebrating like this is a divine union, not an awkward contract signed with goats and paternal guilt. The girl is painted in white, perfumed within an inch of her life, and so weighed down in jewelry she jingles when she walks. She doesn't smile. Meanwhile, the groom's friends are slapping him on the back like he just won an athletic contest, even though he literally just traded olive oil and promises to marry someone who still has baby teeth. The wedding procession itself is a blur of chanting, wine spilling, and the sound of flutes that haven't been tuned since the last eclipse. Someone dances, someone vomits, someone starts reciting poetry about the fertility of spring, and everyone politely ignores how uncomfortable that makes the room. The groom looks pleased. The bride looks like she's hoping Zeus will smite everyone and start civilization over. There's food, at least, a roasted lamb, some bread that doesn't double as a weapon, figs, more wine, and the ever-present olives that taste like salty grief. People are laughing, feasting, and pretending this isn't weird at all. You try to join in, but every time you look at the couple, your soul does a small somersault and curls into a ball. After the feast, the couple is paraded to the groom's home. There's singing, there's cheering, and then there's the moment everyone pretends isn't horrifying, when the bride is led inside and the door closes behind her. The crowd claps. You don't. You just sip your wine and try not to think about what marriage really means in a world where girls become wives before they've stopped playing hopscotch. Eventually you walk home under a dark sky, wondering if the gods ever look down and cringe. But don't worry, tomorrow's a new day. And if you think parenting is going to be any better, wait until you see what raising little philosophers looks like. Spoiler, it involves more yelling, more goats, and exactly 0 parenting books. Let's dive in. You wake up the morning after the wedding with a mild wine hangover and the image of a 12-year-old bride burned into your conscience. There's no time for existential dread though today. You're helping your cousin look after the children, and nothing screams joy of ancient Greek life like trying to raise kids in a world where half of them are expected to become philosophers, and the other half are just future farmers with scoliosis. Children in ancient Greece are not the center of the universe. They're more like unpaid interns in a long family project called survival. From the moment they can walk without face planting into a goat, they're put to work carrying water, sweeping floors, and pretending to understand prayers to Apollo. The boys get all the attention. They're the heirs, the legacy, the ones who might one day shout confusing things in the agora or win a javelin competition, the girls. They're quietly prepped for a life of loom weaving, obedience, and marrying someone 4 decades their senior. Fun your cousin's son, Nicandros, is 7 and already being taught geometry like he's applying to Plato's academy. He can barely keep his tunic on straight, but he's reciting theorems with the dead-eyed focus of a child who knows failing means more chores. His father boasts he'll be a great thinker one day, while Nicandros accidentally drops the stylus and steps in a pile of goat droppings promising. Then there's little Themis, your cousin's daughter, who is smart, funny, and deeply curious. But since she's a girl, her future is already scripted in 3 words: marriage, babies, silence. She tries to sit with her brother during his lessons, but the tutor shoos her away like she's a fly interrupting a symposium. Instead, she's handed a spindle and told to prepare for womanhood, which apparently begins at age 9 and ends with arthritis. Playtime. Forget it. These kids don't get playgrounds. They get rocks, sticks, and maybe a sheep to chase if it's feeling cooperative. They invent games like Throw the Pebble, which is exactly what it sounds like, and guess what's in that pot, which usually ends in mild trauma. You try to entertain them by pretending to be a one-man chorus from the theatre. They laugh. Their mother glares. You stop. There are no bedtime stories, no lullabies, just cautionary tales about hubris, lightning bolts, and being turned into a tree for annoying a god. And if the kids misbehave, discipline is swift and not exactly subtle. A scolding, a slap, or being sent to stand by the altar and think about what Athena would do. You leave your cousin's house with a new respect for ancient Greek children. Not because their lives are charmed, but because they survive all this without screaming constantly. You sigh, stretch your aching back, and think at least you're done babysitting wrong. Now you've been roped into joining a military training session. Hope you like shields, shouting, and dying young. Let's go prepare for glory or an early grave, fresh off a morning of supervising small children armed with spindles and goat droppings. You return home just in time to receive the joyous reminder that you, a proud citizen of Athens, owe military service to the city. No excuses, no postponing. Not even a sore back from babysitting. You grab your gear, or more accurately, your slightly rusted spear, cracked shield, and a helmet that smells like boiled onions and inherited trauma, and march off to training like a good little soon, to be casualty. The training ground is a dusty expanse of rocks, sweat, and broken dreams. Your fellow trainees are a mix of cocky teenagers with delusions of heroism and tired farmers who were drafted between harvesting figs and burying uncles. You're somewhere in between. The instructor, a man built like a marble statue left out in the sun too long, starts shouting before you've even found your footing. He barks about discipline, honor, and dying for the glory of Athens, while spitting flecks of ancient bread into your eyes. First, the shield. It's round, heavy, and about as ergonomic as a boulder stapled to your forearm. You lift it, stumble, and immediately regret every loaf of olive oil-soaked bread you've ever eaten. Then comes the spear. 6 feet of wooden regret topped with a chunk of iron that clearly wants to murder your shoulder. You're told to thrust, block, spin, and not cry in public. You fail at most of that, especially the not crying part, when your arm seizes up halfway through a drill and a nearby goat bleats, like it's mocking your entire bloodline. Marching is next. You move in formation with 20 other men who can't keep a beat and step on each other's toes like it is part of the choreography. The sun beats down, the dust rises, and your feet begin to blister inside sandals that offer all the support of a wet leaf. At one point, you trip over a discarded helmet and land face, first in what you hope is just dirt. Spoiler, it's not. And then comes the pep talk, not the motivational kind. The half of you won't survive your first battle kind. The instructor paints a lovely picture of being impaled by a Theban spear or drowning in your own helmet while retreating. Everyone nods like this is perfectly normal, because it is. Military service in ancient Greece isn't about career advancement or shiny medals. It's about dying young and hopefully being turned into a tragic statue afterward. By the end of the day, your body feels like it's been used as a practice dummy, and your spirit has begun drafting its own funeral song. You limp home, clutching your shield like a crusty teddy bear, wondering if you'll live long enough to ever retire, or at least fake an injury convincing enough to get out of training. But before you can collapse into your dirt bed, a neighbor rushes over. Someone in your household is sick. Time to play doctor, except the Greek version doesn't involve medicine. It involves herbs, prayers, and possibly a goat's liver. Let's diagnose despair. You limp home from military training with the grace of a man who's been hit by both a chariot and emotional disappointment, hoping for nothing more than to collapse into your flea-infested straw pile and stop existing for a few hours. But of course, the gods have other plans. Your neighbor runs over wild-eyed, shouting something about your cousin's wife's brother's leg turning green and emitting a smell that could wake the dead. Congratulations, you've just been promoted to local medic. Whether you know anything about medicine or not, you arrive at the scene, and the patient is lying on a woven mat that looks like it's seen more funerals than recoveries. He's pale, sweating, and mumbling about Hades, classic case of definitely dying. But in ancient Greece, that diagnosis doesn't lead to antibiotics or surgery. Number here, medicine is a thrilling blend of guesswork, superstition, and whatever plant happens to be growing nearby. You kneel beside him, try to look wise, and immediately summon an old woman who claims to be an expert in healing because she once stood near Hippocrates, her toolkit, a handful of dried leaves, some beeswax, and a jar of leeches that she carries around like sacred relics. The leeches are first, obviously, because nothing screams cutting edge healthcare like letting a parasite slurp your blood in hopes of reducing your fever. And also, apparently, your will to live. She slaps them on the leg like she's seasoning a roast, and tells everyone to stand back and let the magic happen. The man screams, everyone nods. It's working. Next come the prayers. Not subtle ones either. Full volume chants to Asclepius, the god of healing, delivered with the desperation of someone yelling for help while their house is on fire. A neighbor throws in an offering some bread and what might be a pigeon feather. You light incense, you pretend to feel hopeful. Deep down, you know the gods stopped answering these calls sometime around the last plague. Someone brings herbs. No one knows what they are, doesn't matter. They're boiled into a bitter tea and poured into the patient's mouth. While he gags and asks if this is the underworld already, the healer nods solemnly and says things like, "The humours must balance," while poking his abdomen and pretending that the swelling means the bile is angry. The bile is always angry, probably because no one knows what they're doing. And then, of course, the outcome, he dies quietly. Mid-prayer, everyone pauses. The healer sighs, shakes her head, and says something about fate. You nod along with the crowd, but inside you're screaming. He needed rest, clean water, maybe not the leeches. But that's not how this works here, not in this era. Medicine isn't about curing, it's about ceremony. And when the ceremony fails, you just shrug and say, "The gods willed it." You stumble home exhausted, soaked in herbal failure, and hoping you don't wake up with a cough. But tomorrow's not for resting. It's sacrifice day. So sharpen your knife and grab your best goat. Let's go bribe some gods. You arrive home, still reeking of herbs guilt and dried goat blood from the latest failed medical adventure, only to be reminded that today is sacred. Sacred meaning it's time to bribe the gods again before they smite your house, your crops, or your intestines. You don't even get to sit down. A neighbor walks by, nods solemnly, and says, "You're bringing the goat, right?" And just like that, your lunch has been promoted to religious offering. Greek religion is not about peace, serenity, or quiet contemplation. It's about fear. Raw, superstitious, all-consuming fear of dozens of temperamental, immortally hormonal gods who will ruin your life for sneezing at the wrong altar. Zeus throws lightning because he's bored. Hera holds grudges longer than your mother-in-law. Poseidon once sank a fleet because someone built a nicer fountain. If one of them wakes up cranky, your city could be on fire by sunset. So yes, you make sacrifices often. You lead your goat, formerly known as dinner, up to the temple, trying not to bond with it. You avoid eye contact. You hum. You pretend it isn't looking at you like it trusted you. At the temple, there is already a line. People holding baskets of grain, wine, honey cakes, and the occasional terrified chicken. It's less holy ceremony and more supernatural toll booth. You hand over your goat. The priest mutters a prayer, lifts a knife. And that's the end of that. The gods are fed. You are not. The smoke from the offering fills the air, heavy and greasy. It clings to your toga, your lungs, your soul. The priest nods like that should solve everything from crop failure to marital tension. Everyone cheers. A few people weep. You think about your empty stomach and your sacrificed lunch and wonder if Apollo appreciates irony. Then comes the hymn singing. A chorus of off-key men and enthusiastic children belt out songs to whichever god is currently being appeased. Today it's Demeter. Yesterday it was Ares. Tomorrow. Whoever you think might be plotting your downfall. You clap along, you mumble the words, and you wonder how much of this is faith and how much is just tradition with a fear complex. You say your prayer, something vague and desperate like, "Please, don't ruin my crops, my joints, or my general existence," and drop a coin in the offering bowl that looks suspiciously like a repurposed chamber pot. You've done your part. You've paid your dues. You still don't trust the gods, but you figure appeasement is better than nothing, especially after last week's freak hailstorm that only hit your roof. As the sun sets, you walk home, hungry, tired, and still not entirely sure if that goat died for your sins or your neighbor's plumbing crisis. But one thing's for sure, religion here isn't gentle. It's survival. It's negotiation. It's desperately trying to stay off the gods' do not bless list. And now that you're spiritually exhausted and physically starving, it's time to think about clothes, or more accurately, the single piece of fabric that is somehow supposed to function as pants, shirt, coat, and dignity. Let's talk about fashion. Prepare to be underwhelmed. You return home from sacrificing your lunch goat, drenched in temple smoke and spiritual confusion, only to be slapped by a new realization. You smell like roasted animal and holy incense, and your toga looks like it lost a fight with a wine cart. So you do what any respectable ancient Greek would do. You change into the exact same thing, in a slightly different shade of beige. Welcome to fashion in the ancient world where every outfit is a glorified bedsheet and pockets are a futuristic fantasy. First, the tunic. It's your underlayer, though calling it underwear gives it far too much credit. It's a rectangle of fabric, vaguely shaped, stitched at the shoulders, and tied around the waist with rope, or wishful thinking. If it's hot, you sweat through it. If it's cold, you shiver in it. Either way, it clings to your body like a judgmental ex who remembers your worst decisions. If you're rich, it's dyed. If you're poor, it's natural, coloured, meaning, the same shade as your floor. Then comes the himation, a large, heavy piece of cloth draped over your shoulder and wrapped around your body like you're trying to keep warm. Without looking too emotionally available, you don't wear it, you wrestle with it. It slides, it twists, it betrays you in the wind. There's no sewing, no buttons, no structure, just fabric and your own fading will to live. And let's talk about pockets. There are none. Absolutely none. Want to carry a coin? Tuck it into your belt and hope it doesn't fall into your sandal. Need to transport figs? Good luck, not looking like a wrinkled fruit smuggler with a lumpy toga. Even the women's dresses, long draped and suspiciously similar to curtains, offer no storage. You carry what you can, or you bribe a slave to carry it for you. That's it. Those are the options. Footwear. Sandals if you're lucky, bare feet if you're not. No cushioning, no arch support, just thin leather straps trying to survive another day in a world full of sharp stones and goat droppings. You tie them in the morning and pray they don't snap before you get to the agora. And fashion statements? Ha! If your sandals match, you are a style icon. If they're clean, you're probably a god. Accessories are equally uninspiring. Maybe a brooch if you're feeling fancy. Maybe a garland on festival days if you enjoy bugs flying at your face all afternoon. Jewelry exists, but only for the rich. And even then, it mostly looks like metal spirals designed by someone who'd never met a neck before. So no, you're not strutting through Athens like a model. You're dragging fabric across uneven roads, retying your belt every 5 steps, and pretending you don't notice your tunic riding up in public. But hey, at least everyone else looks equally ridiculous. That's the real uniform of ancient Greece, shared discomfort. Now that you're dressed like a crumpled statue and still hungry from sacrificing your goat, maybe it's time for a little fun, or what the Greeks call fun rituals, rocks, and festivals that get weird fast. Let's explore daily entertainment. Lower your expectations. You've wrangled yourself into a toga that fits like a soggy curtain, managed not to trip over your own sandals, and now you're ready for some leisure. At least that's what the ancient Greeks call it. But don't expect card games or beach naps. No daily entertainment in this sun. Bleached civilization looks more like a chaotic blend of shouting, rock throwing, and public rituals that blur the line between worship and mild insanity. Let's start with debates, not casual chats, full volume arena, sized philosophical jousting matches where grown men argue for hours about things like whether motion exists or if shadows have feelings. They do this in the agora, the same place you were just overcharged for rotting fish, now repurposed as a theatre for ego and throat damage. There are no microphones, just sweaty men in tunics yelling about justice, while pigeons poop nearby and someone tries to sell grapes in the background. You listen for a bit, pretend to nod thoughtfully, then quietly slink away before someone asks your opinion on virtue, and you accidentally start a civil war. Then there's the Olympic-style fun, by which we mean watching muscular men hurl rocks, spears, and themselves in random directions for glory and possibly a crown made of leaves. It's less of a sport and more of a demonstration in how quickly someone can sprain an ankle while half naked. You cheer, not because you care who wins, but because one of them might pass out dramatically and you're desperate for variety. If you're lucky, a javelin will go rogue, and the crowd gets to gasp in unison like it's a group exercise in panic. And now we arrive at the festivals. Glorious, chaotic, questionably sacred festivals that take over the city like divine frat parties. The most famous is Dionysia, dedicated to Dionysus, god of wine, theatre, and bad decisions. Everyone drinks, everyone sings, people wear masks, dance through the streets, and sometimes chase each other with torches. They're shouting, nudity, dramatic wailing, and at least one guy who ends up crying into a basket of olives by nightfall. It's tradition. You're supposed to feel liberated. Mostly you feel sticky and confused. Some festivals involve actual competitions, poetry, music, interpretive goat dancing. Others are just days off where everyone pretends to be extra pious, while secretly enjoying that the temple is handing out free bread soaked in something alcoholic. You participate because not participating is suspicious. You drink because it's safer than the water. You clap because everyone else is clapping. And you pray to whatever god is in charge of memory that no one brings up your name in next week's reenactment of the Battle of Marathon. By the end of the day, your head is spinning, your feet are blistered, and your toga smells like goat milk and regret. You're entertained technically, but you're also exhausted in a way that only singing, sweating, and pretending to care about sacred cucumber rituals can accomplish. Tomorrow, though, it gets serious. Someone died. Time to dig a hole, hire a flute player, and put coins on their eyes. Let's talk about death. Again, you've survived a festival that involved more screaming than celebration, drank something that may or may not have been wine, and danced in the streets with people who've never bathed voluntarily. But before your brain can fully recover from the public weirdness, someone dies. Of course they do. Ancient Greece is basically one long funeral procession with snacks in between. Now you're at a burial. Not your own, unfortunately, which means you're stuck helping dig a hole for a man who yelled about politics every morning and whose greatest contribution to society was once throwing a sandal at a cat. Death here isn't a quiet affair. It's loud, dramatic, and somehow both sacred and absolutely unhinged. First, the body gets washed. Not by professionals, by family members, you. If you're lucky, it's emotional, awkward, and very wet. They anoint the body in oils, wrap it in cloth, and lay it out like a display item no one asked for. People come by to wail loudly. The louder the grief, the more respected the dead. You're not sure if people are mourning or auditioning for a tragic play. Someone actually beats their chest until their toga slips. You pretend not to notice. Then comes the most important step, coins. 2 small obols are placed over the eyes, or under the tongue. Why? so the dead can pay Charon, the underworld's grumpiest ferry driver, to take them across the river Styx. No coin, no ride. You get stuck wandering the shores for eternity, haunting your ungrateful descendants and regretting your life choices. So yes, even in death there are tolls. And of course the rich get better coins. Gilded eyes, fancy funerals, and the hope that Hades might seat them near the fire instead of in it. The burial itself is pure chaos. You and a few others dig a hole with tools that resemble large spoons and bad intentions. The ground is hard, the sun is angry, and there's always one guy pretending his back hurts so he doesn't have to help. You lower the body in with the grace of a dropped couch, say a few vague words about honor and legacy, and then it's time for the dirt. Lots of dirt. Dirt in your hands, your sandals, your mouth, because some well-meaning mourner tossed a handful too close to your face. Now you taste grief and soil. Afterward, there's a feast. Of course there is. Greeks mourn with their stomachs. Bread, olives, salted fish, wine, and stories that conveniently leave out all the ways the dead guy was kind of annoying. You raise a cup, mutter something about legacy, and pretend your mouth isn't still full of burial dust. By sunset, you're back in your hovel, exhausted, itchy, and deeply aware that someday this will be you, coins on your eyes, people arguing over your goats, and someone like you, half asleep, tossing dirt into your mouth. But for now, congratulations. You're still alive in ancient Greece, dirty, hungry, yelled at, and somehow still functioning. Sleep tight. Try not to cough. The gods might think it's your turn next.